What if one night of kindness between strangers turned into a storm neither of them was ready for? She was just a humble bartender trying to survive. He was a billionaire trying to forget. No plans, no promises, just one night. But what happens when that night leads to a life and the world refuses to see past her skin or her silence? This is not just a love story. It's a story about dignity, defiance, and a daughter born from something real. Stay with us, because what's coming next will break you, heal you, and stay with you forever. The rain hit the sidewalks of Chicago like piano keys, a soft jazz rhythm echoing off the city's bones. Inside the dim glow of the Velvet Note, a low-lit jazz bar tucked between two forgotten buildings in the South Loop, the world moved more slowly. The kind of place where broken hearts drank in shadows and saxophones stitched the silence. Tiana moved behind the bar like a whisper. Beautiful in a quiet, unshowy way. Dark skin glowed under the golden sconces. High cheekbones, soft eyes, a figure that spoke of grace, not spectacle. She wore a simple black blouse, sleeves rolled hair tied up in a puff. No rings, no gloss, just a little rose balm on her lips and a warm, "What can I get you?" for every soul who walked in with weight in their chest. She wasn't just a bartender. She was a listener, a healer, a witness. At 27, she had mastered the art of stillness. No one knew her full story, and she liked it that way. Her mother had once told her, "Real power doesn't scream. It sits still and watches." Tiana sat still a lot that night at 11:47 p.m. Damian Hayes stepped into the bar like a man who had just been hit by a storm he couldn't name. He didn't belong in places like the Velvet Note. Too clean, too crisp. $1,000 coat, a watch that could pay rent for a year, and an expression like granite, carved under pressure. The kind of man who usually ordered private rooms and didn't wait for menus. But that night, he didn't want penthouses or sycophants. He wanted to be where no one knew him, where his name wasn't a brand, where he could feel nothing. He sat at the bar, 3 stools down from a retired teacher, grading essays, 2 seats over from a sax player nursing a bourbon. He didn't look at Tiana when he spoke. Whiskey neat, something strong. She poured without a word. The silence between them thickened as the minutes passed. Tiana glanced at him once, then twice. She had seen sorrow before, but his was refined, contained, the kind that didn't weep, it bled inward. "Rough night," she finally asked, voice low, like the bass line humming from the speakers. Damian chuckled. "Dry, bitter, rough year." She smiled. "Then it's your kind of bar." He turned to her, then really looked, and for a moment the tension cracked. He asked her name. She gave it. He didn't give his, just said he ran a company. Too big to fail. He added with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. She didn't push, just asked him what he was running from. They talked. At first it was surface favorite jazz albums, the drink that defined a heartbreak and Chicago winters. Then it deepened. He told her he'd been engaged, said her name was Sloane, said she left a note, not a goodbye. Said success didn't prepare you for silence. Tiana didn't offer pity. She offered presence. And that's what undid him. By 1:13 a.m. The bar was thinning. At 1:42, it was just the two of them. She poured him one last drink, and he asked if he could walk her out. She should have said no. She knew the rules. But there was something in the way he looked at her, not as a savior, not as a solution, just as someone real. They walked. The rain had stopped. The world was quiet. At 2:17 a.m., it wasn't lust. It wasn't love. It was two wounds pressed together, trying to stop the bleeding. They didn't exchange numbers, didn't make promises. When morning came, he was gone, and that should have been the end. But it wasn't. The rain hit the sidewalks of Chicago, like piano keys, a soft jazz rhythm echoing off the city's bones. Inside the dim glow of the Velvet Note, a low-lit jazz bar, tucked between two forgotten buildings, in the South Loop, the world moved slower. The kind of place where broken hearts drank in shadows, and saxophones stitched the silence. Tiana moved behind the bar like a whisper, beautiful in a quiet, unshowy way. Dark skin glowed under the golden sconces. High cheekbones, soft eyes, a figure that spoke of grace, not spectacle. She wore a simple black blouse, sleeves rolled, hair tied up in a puff. No rings, no gloss, just a little rose balm on her lips and a warm, "What can I get you?" for every soul who walked in with weight in their chest. She wasn't just a bartender. She was a listener, a healer, a witness. At 27, she had mastered the art of stillness. No one knew her full story, and she liked it that way. Her mother had once told her, "Real power doesn't scream, it sits still and watches." Tiana sat still a lot that night at 11:47 p.m. Damian Hayes stepped into the bar like a man who had just been hit by a storm he couldn't name. He didn't belong in places like the Velvet Note. Too clean, too crisp. $1,000 Coda watch that could pay rent for a year, and an expression like granite carved under pressure. The kind of man who usually ordered private rooms and didn't wait for menus. But that night, he didn't want penthouses or sycophants. He wanted to be where no one knew him, where his name wasn't a brand, where he could feel nothing. He sat at the bar, 3 stools down from a retired teacher, grading essays, 2 seats over from a sax player, nursing a bourbon. He didn't look at Tiana when he spoke. Whiskey neat, something strong. She poured without a word. The silence between them thickened as the minutes passed. Tiana glanced at him once, then twice. She had seen sorrow before, but his was refined, contained, the kind that didn't weep, it bled inward. "Rough night?" she finally asked, voice low like the bass line humming from the speakers. Damian chuckled. "Dry, bitter, rough year." She smiled. "Then it's your kind of bar." He turned to her, then really looked, and for a moment the tension cracked. He asked her name. She gave it. He didn't give his. Just said he ran a company, too big to fail. He added with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. She didn't push, just asked him what he was running from. They talked. At first it was surface favorite jazz albums, the drink that defined a heartbreak, and Chicago winters. Then it deepened. He told her he'd been engaged. Said her name was Sloane. Said she left a note, not a goodbye. Said success didn't prepare you for silence. Tiana didn't offer pity. She offered presence. And that's what undid him. By 1:13 a.m., the bar was thinning. At 1:42, it was just the two of them. She poured him one last drink, and he asked if he could walk her out. She should have said no. She knew the rules. But there was something in the way he looked at her, not as a savior, not as a solution, just as someone real. They walked. The rain had stopped. The world was quiet. At 2:17 a.m., it wasn't lust, it wasn't love. It was two wounds pressed together, trying to stop the bleeding. They didn't exchange numbers, didn't make promises. When morning came, he was gone, and that should have been the end, but it wasn't. 3 weeks passed, and the city kept moving, but something inside, Tiana, didn't. The late shifts blurred together, the music no longer soothing the clinking of glasses, now felt like alarms. She brushed off the nausea, at first blamed it on greasy staff meals or stress, but it came back stronger each morning. At 6:12 a.m. on a rainy Thursday, she sat on the edge of her bathtub with a dollar store pregnancy test in her shaking hand. 2 pink lines, bold, unapologetic. Her breath hitched in her throat. The room spun. No. She whispered even though she already knew. It made sense now. The fatigue, the emotional weight. Her body had known before her heart did. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just stared at the test and said nothing. For days, she said nothing to anyone. She worked like nothing had changed. She poured drinks for strangers and laughed at jokes that weren't funny. But inside, the silence was screaming. She didn't call him. Didn't search for Damien online. She had no intention of being a burden. This wasn't a trap. This wasn't revenge. It was just real. A life growing quietly. She kept it to herself, even when her co-workers started whispering. Even when her manager, a white woman named Brenda, with a sharp tongue and no filter, commented on her slower pace, her frequent bathroom breaks. Tiana, if you're going to be lazy, at least be discreet. She snapped one night, not knowing the weight of her words. Tiana swallowed. The bitterness, smiled politely, and finished her shift. Rent was due. Groceries were thin. She counted quarters at a laundromat and picked up an extra Sunday shift cleaning the owner's office. Her neighbors didn't know, but the landlord did. He noticed the prenatal vitamins in the trash, the silence at night. Pregnant, huh? He said with a smirk when she came to drop off rent. Better find the baby daddy quick, sweetheart. This isn't a charity. She didn't respond, just left the envelope and walked away. Damien came back to the bar once, sat at the far end, alone. She felt his presence before she saw him. He looked tired, haunted, maybe by her, maybe not. He didn't say a word. Neither did she. Their eyes met once, just once, and it was enough. He didn't know, and she didn't tell him. It wasn't the right moment. Maybe it never would be. The weeks turned into months. The whispers at work turned into judgment. You know who the father is? Someone asked while refilling the ice. Probably some guy who bailed, or she's playing some rich fool. Another chuckled. Or maybe she doesn't know who it is at all. Tiana said nothing. She carried her trays and her baby bump with dignity. Brenda pulled her aside one night and said, "You're a liability now. Customers don't like seeing a pregnant bartender. This isn't some sad indie film, it's a business." The next day she was off the schedule, out of a job, out of stability, and now out of options. The landlord found an excuse to terminate her lease. Noise complaints, he claimed. The place isn't safe for a kid anyway. She left without protest. A suitcase, a duffel bag, a belly that wouldn't stop growing. She slept in a friend's basement for a week, then on a couch in a church office. Every night she told herself she would be okay, that she'd find something, anything. She worked at a laundromat, cleaned classrooms, waited tables at a diner that paid under the table. Her feet ached, her back screamed, but she smiled at every customer, hid every wince. Then came the night someone recorded her being yelled at by a customer. "Don't let that baby make you think you're special," the man said, slamming his change on the counter. "You're still nothing but a bar girl who couldn't keep her legs closed." The video hit social media. The comments were vicious. Classic welfare queen, looking for a payout. Where's the father? Bet she doesn't even know. Tiana read them in silence. She didn't reply. She never did. She sat alone that night in a small room with flickering lights and one window that didn't open. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered, "I'm sorry, but I'm not giving up on you." She didn't know it then, but the world was about to change. It started with a dizzy spell during a morning shift at the hospital kitchen, where she had finally landed part-time work. The smell of bleach and reheated soup hit her hard, and before she could steady herself, the tray of clean utensils clattered to the floor. Her legs buckled. The tile rushed up. Blackness swallowed her. When she opened her eyes, the lights were harsh, and the air smelled sterile. Monitors beeped, an IV was dripped, and a nurse with kind eyes whispered gently, "You fainted. You're dehydrated." And about 21 weeks along, Tiana nodded weakly, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. Then the door opened again, and in walked a man she never expected to see again. Damien. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look shocked. He looked shattered. Like the last piece of something precious had finally cracked. He had been at the hospital for a board meeting. He explained on behalf of his foundation. Then someone had mentioned a Jane Doe young, pregnant, dehydrated, brought in, unconscious from the cafeteria floor. And something pulled him there. Some magnetic thread that told him it was her. When he saw her face through the glass, he stopped breathing. And when he saw her chart, everything inside him collapsed. "You're pregnant," he said. Tiana turned away. "Yes." His voice dropped. "Is it mine?" She didn't speak. Her silence was confirmation enough. He sat down slowly, like gravity had doubled. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him then, and there was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion. "Because I didn't want anything from you. I didn't think it mattered to you. It was one night. I never wanted to trap you." His jaw clenched. "You think I'd walk away from my child?" She hesitated. "I didn't know what kind of man you were, Damien. That night, you barely knew who you were." The conversation unraveled fast. He felt betrayed. She felt judged. He offered support, money, housing. Whatever she needed, but she refused. "I'm not a case file. I don't want your guilt check." He raised his voice just once. "I'm trying to do the right thing." She met his eyes. "Then start by listening." The room fell quiet. After he left, something inside him broke further. He called his assistant and ordered a full background check. He had to know the truth, not just about the pregnancy, but about everything. Where she lived, where she worked, how she'd survived. And the report came back like a slap. Fired, evicted, harassed online, shamed in public. Damien read every word with his fists clenched and his heart sinking. He hadn't just missed her pregnancy. He had missed her suffering. 2 days later, the video resurfaced. The diner incident. Someone reposted it this time, tagging him. "Damien Westbrook, care to explain why your baby mama is getting dragged by strangers while you sip champagne in boardrooms?" The internet devoured it. Some defended her. Most didn't. She was accused of being a liar, a gold digger, a nobody trying to hook a billionaire. Damien's name trended. So did hers, and she had said nothing. Still, he drove to her temporary apartment himself, not the mansion he offered. Not the luxury suite his assistant reserved, a cramped second-story studio in a forgotten part of town. He knocked. No answer. Then again, the door creaked open. Tiana stood there barefoot, belly full and shoulders squared. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you," he answered. Inside, the confrontation reignited. He wanted to take responsibility. She wanted to protect her peace. "I've got this," she told him. "I don't need your saving." He laughed bitterly. "This isn't about saving. It's about showing up. It's about being a father." Her voice cracked. Then, "You don't get to show up now, Damien. You weren't there when I couldn't breathe, when I had to beg for a job, when I was insulted in front of strangers and told I was trash." His silence was his answer. And then she said the thing that gutted him. "You walked away when you didn't even know it." He left, not because he wanted to, but because she needed him to. And that night, he didn't sleep. He watched the video again. He read the comments. He reread her file. And finally, he made a decision. One that would rewrite the story, not just for her, but for both of them. Because some truths cost more to ignore than to confront. The press conference wasn't planned. It was raw, unfiltered. Damien stood alone behind the mic in a gray suit that didn't hide the sleepless night in his eyes. The headlines were still fresh. The whispers hadn't stopped. Everyone wanted a comment, a denial, a lawyered-up statement. Instead, they got the truth. "Her name is Tiana," he said, "and yes, the child she's carrying is mine." The room exploded. Cameras flashed like gunfire. Gasps cut through the air. "And I want the world to know," he continued, voice firm, "that what she's endured is not her shame. It's ours." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. He didn't blink. That same moment across the city, Tiana stood in front of the TV in her small apartment. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands cradled the curve of her stomach. Her eyes didn't move. The world now knew, and she hadn't been the one to say it. Damien kept speaking. He told the press that he didn't fall into this situation. He walked into it, that what started as a fleeting night turned into a responsibility he couldn't ignore. But more than that, he admitted something no one expected. "I didn't just leave that night with her memory," he said. "I left with something. I didn't realize until too late. I left with the beginning of love." Gasps turned to murmurs. Tweets exploded. The feed went viral. But in Tiana's apartment, the silence was deafening. She didn't feel flattered. She felt exposed. Her phone buzzed for hours. Friends, enemies, reporters, trolls. Some asked for interviews. Others sent, "Hate gold digger," "fake victim." Another one trying to trap a rich man. She turned the phone off, sat on the edge of her bed, and cried for the first time in months. Not because of shame, but because the world had taken something sacred and made it a spectacle. Damien tried to call. She didn't answer. He texted, "Please, just hear me out." No reply. He sent flowers. They wilted on her porch. He waited outside her apartment for hours. She never came down. So he turned to the only thing he had left. Truth. He released a letter, a handwritten statement to the press. No PR spin, just raw words. He wrote about the bar, the night, her grace, her laughter, the way she listened when he didn't even know what to say. He wrote about the way she never once asked for anything. Not money, not help, not even his number. And he ended it with one line that silenced every feed. "I failed her, but I still believe in us." The internet turned. Not all of it, but enough. Hashtags shifted from hate to healing, from slurs to support, and quietly behind the noise, Tiana read the letter. Every word. Twice. She went to the park that night. No cameras. Just wind and lamplight. She sat on a bench beneath a tree and watched the stars blink through the city haze. And she whispered to the child inside her, "What do I do now?" The next morning, a knock. She opened the door. Damien stood there. No flowers, no gifts, just eyes that looked tired and honest. "I didn't do this for the world," he said. "I did it for you. And if you still hate me, I'll go." But if there's a piece of you that still remembers that night for what it was, let me try again. Not as a CEO, not as a fix, but as a man who wants to be better. She didn't answer. Not yet. But her eyes didn't shut the door either. Sometimes the hardest truth is letting someone earn their way back. And Tiana didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. That night she left her apartment and walked for miles. Past storefronts closing down. Past kids laughing too loud on corners. Past a world that still didn't know what to make of a woman like her. She wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to remember who she was before all of this, before her name was trending, before her belly made strangers stare, before a billionaire cracked open her quiet world with one night and 1,000 consequences. Meanwhile, Damien wasn't waiting for a miracle. He was working. He put projects on hold, called in favors, sat down with his board and told them the truth. "I'm stepping back for a while," he said, "because I have something more important to rebuild." They didn't understand. But they didn't stop him. Power, when used right, can be redirected. The news turned, interviews were canceled, statements retracted, but not everyone forgave. The internet has a long memory and a short temper. Tiana still received hate mail, still got glare at the pharmacy, still had to wear headphones on the train to drown out whispers, but something else began to shift. At the community center where she started volunteering again, women came up to her quietly, placed their hands on her arm, and whispered, "Thank you." Single mothers, college dropouts, baristas with dreams too big for their aprons. They saw her not as a scandal, but as a survivor, as a symbol. And she didn't want to be one. But she accepted it. Because if she could endure, maybe they could too. Damien started showing up not just in her world, but for her world. Quietly, respectfully. He paid for the prenatal program at the free clinic she visited. No fanfare, no announcements, just action. He funded scholarships for young women of color, studying law and social work. He never took credit, but she knew. She saw his fingerprints on the hope blooming around her. Still, the hardest thing wasn't forgiving him. It was forgiving herself for wanting to try again. Then came the dinner. It wasn't fancy. A small table, a home-cooked meal. Her recipe, not his. The smell of garlic and thyme, the flicker of candlelight, the quiet hum of the baby kicking beneath her ribs. Damien didn't bring gifts, just his presence, his vulnerability. And when he took her hand and looked her in the eyes, his voice didn't shake. "I can't undo the silence." He said, "I can't undo the pain. But I'm here now, and I will be every day forward if you let me." She didn't cry. She didn't swoon. She simply nodded and whispered, "Then start with the dishes." They laughed. The kind of laughter that feels like healing, like home. In the weeks that followed, they built slowly. He came to the doctor's appointments, held her hand when she heard the heartbeat again, painted the nursery, asked her opinion, didn't override, didn't rescue, just stayed, present human. The world watched, but they didn't perform. Then one day, Tiana stood on the stage of the community center, now named in honor of her late grandmother, and introduced a new initiative. "This place isn't just for those who need help," she said. "It's for those who've been told they don't belong. It's for those who've been told they're too brown, too poor, too complicated. This is for the girls who carry shame. They didn't earn. You are enough. You've always been enough." The applause was thunderous. Damien stood in the back, holding their daughter. His eyes never left Tiana. Not even once. She didn't need him to save her. She never did. But he learned how to stand beside her without dimming her light, and that made all the difference. 1 year later, the jazz bar where it all began didn't serve cocktails anymore. It served stories. It served books. It served kids with dreams, too big for the corners. They were born into. The neon sign still flickered outside, but now it read, "The Luminary, a community literacy hub, founded by Damien, run by Tiana, built with quiet reverence for where they came from." There were no velvet ropes, no dress codes, no headlines, just shelves lined with paperbacks and picture books, just music drifting through speakers and warm light spilling across well-worn wood. And every Friday afternoon, children from the South Side would sit cross-legged on beanbags as Tiana read to them. Her voice was soft, but strong, like the wind that shaped cliffs. Her daughter toddled between her knees, clutching a toy trumpet and squealing with joy. And in the back, Damien would sit in a folding chair taking notes, preparing poems to read on Sundays for teens who never believed their voices mattered. He never wore a tie. He never mentioned his billions. He came with open hands and a listening heart. He'd learned that love wasn't built in declarations. It was built in consistency, in presence, in choosing again and again to show up. Tiana never wore diamonds. She wore peace. She wore joy stitched into the corners of her smile. She still remembered what it felt like to be invisible. Still remember the sting of judgment and the sharp edge of being underestimated. But she didn't carry bitterness. She carried purpose. Because what they built wasn't just a family. It was a movement made of gentleness and steel. In downtown boardrooms, Damien's name still held weight. But now, when executives brought up profits, he brought up people. Now, when policies were drafted, he insisted on equity clauses. His empire didn't shrink. It evolved, and people noticed, shareholders questioned, then applauded. Because the world is starving for decency, and decency, when done boldly, changes everything. Tiana became a quiet icon, not because she chased the spotlight, but because she lit fires in the dark. News crews begged for interviews. She declined them all. "Come to the reading circle," she'd say. "Sit with the kids. That's where the real story is." Some came, most didn't, but it didn't matter. The impact was already rippling. A girl in Atlanta started a similar bar to library transformation. A single father in Detroit wrote his first poem in decades after hearing Damien recite Langston Hughes on a rainy Sunday. A grandmother in Oakland knitted blankets with affirmations sewn in for every baby born at Tiana's wellness clinic. Change had taken root, and it grew in silence. It grew in soil that most people ignored. There were still hard days. Nights when the baby cried for hours. Days when the world still judged too fast and loved too slow. But in their small Chicago apartment filled with secondhand furniture and first-rate laughter, Tiana and Damien lived without apology, without masks, with truth. Their love wasn't loud. It was lived, and that made all the difference. They called her a mistake. They called her a gold digger. They called her less. But in the end, she was the beginning of a man's redemption, the beginning of a community's rebirth, the beginning of a legacy built not on wealth, but on unwavering love. And maybe that's what we all need to remember. Not every woman in silence is weak. Not every man with power forgets how to kneel. And sometimes, the smallest heartbeat can rewrite the story the world tried to bury. If this story moved, you share it. Because someone out there needs to believe that they too are enough. Now tell us, would you have seen her worth before the world did?